Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Tactica Tuesday. I am Paul Conti, one of your illustrious hosts, with my co-host, James from Star Mini Gaming. Say hello, James.
Hello, James. Hey, Paul. Hey, everybody.
There you go. Right on cue, exactly as I expected you to. And this week we have our fantastic guest of the week to talk about the birth of a metagame in the Age of Sigmar tournament scene, Mr. Tyler Emerson. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, gentlemen. Doing well. Thanks for having me.
I have a quick bone to pick with you, Paul. You undersold our guest, okay? You called us illustrious, and you called Tyler something less than that. That cannot fly.
Which sounds appropriate.
You should be ashamed.
Purely semantical. Just right off the top, we are back from a brief hiatus. I was on vacation last week. James was sick last week. We did not prepare enough to have a show recorded ahead, so we missed a week last week. Very sad, but that means we have an extra jam-packed episode for you guys this week, and for that we will start with the news items of the week. Well, weeks now at this point. So I'll toss that over to James and Tyler for what's been going on, because I've been in Disney World for the past 9 days, and I have no idea what's been going on.
You've been in fictional world. I'll go ahead and cover first, Tyler, because mine's really, really short. So, as you all know, we are now basically at the end of the Season of War campaign, and GW will be announcing kind of the results of that and what that's going to mean going forward for the narrative, which I'm excited for. I was glad to be able to help pull my local gaming shop that was very, very heavily leaning towards chaos actually into a death victory through going undefeated in this campaign and through painting up lots and lots of single model heroes like Karen Wraiths and all to try to generate those painting points as quickly as I could. You know, kind of gaming the system right. It seems appropriate for this week. What's yet to come, though, and it's actually rather ironically appropriate, is the two armies that kind of came out of this the closest to first and second place were Order and Chaos. No real surprise there. And GW still has their special huge game that all the North American retailers are going to play, with half of them being Order, half of them being Chaos, and that is the second half of this campaign, and that will ultimately I guess be the other part that decides really what happens to the realm of life and the story of Age of Sigmar going forward. So they'll probably announce, well, actually they may not announce the results of that, but I'll talk to my connections that are playing in that game to find out how everything goes, probably before GW announces anything.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah. And my local store was absolutely dominated by destruction. Just completely dominated.
I'm glad to see that it was something other than just Order or Chaos, because that's most of what I saw. Other than my own being able to swing it at the very end.
Right.
Do you guys have any speculation on what we might see in terms of the effects of this campaign going forward? What they might do?
I mean, Order 1, as far as I know, the last post I saw that they were winning, and I highly suspect that they'll win the matchup. I'm enjoying it because I get to kind of play like Emperor Palpatine behind the shadows here, because 3 of the Order players and 2 of the Chaos players for this big mega battle have talked to me personally for kind of strategic advice. So I'm feeding the Chaos side good tactics, but then I'm telling the Order side everything I'm telling the Chaos side, so they kind of get a little bit of a leg up. So in the end, I predict that, you know, it's going to have been a very costly war. The realm of life is going to be damaged, and we're going to have some kind of special thing come out of this where, like, even though Lariel's been healing it, that it may never fully heal. And we might, I'm hoping, we might start seeing things like, I'm actually in the process of converting up like Sylvaneth to be like undead Sylvaneth. I really hope that we start to see a little bit of like the blurring of the lines of these factions as a result of this campaign.
That'd be pretty sweet. Any thoughts, Paul?
My suspicion is that it's going to drive narrative, but it's not going to actually impact us gameplay-wise. I think there's not going to be anything in terms of what actually is on the table, other than maybe some new scenarios that are themed around it or something like that, or changing the direction of where like the next campaign is. But I don't think this is going to change like what new releases are coming out or what rules we get for models or anything like that.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, just with release schedule and all the tremendous amount of work they have to do in advance to get these releases ready, it'd be hard to have something like this influence the release windows.
Right.
Yeah, and I suspect that our next segment of the story that we're going to get for the next 6 months is probably going to have nothing to do with the Realm of Life, and then 6 months from now we'll find out what the next stage of the Realm of Life story is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
In the narrative, they've covered about half the realms already, and so we'll probably start seeing the other half, I would assume.
Yeah, I can't wait for the Realm of Light, Realm of Shadow. We were told at the beginning of this year by Black Library, they had a post that it was in January in terms of the realms that they would be covering, and they all the ones that they've mentioned have come to light so far, except for Shadow, Shyish, and I guess Shyish, we're starting to see that, the Realm of Death, and Shadow. We were supposed to have that by the end of the year, so hopefully that will happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hope so.
So
Tyler, do you have anything?
Yeah, one thing that I came across on Facebook, I won't mention his name just in case, because I didn't ask him for permission, but as a guy who posted in the AOS Fans group, he creates these summaries of the novels and AOS novels, and he had read The Lord of Undeath, the latest one featuring the Papa Nagash, and he said that to quote him, there's also various and sundry clearly Kemrian-inspired units described in The Lord of Undeath. My suspicion is we will see them in the future has been increased. And he said that there were some descriptions in that novel that sounded very much like Ushabti. So maybe, just maybe, we might be seeing the hoped-for kind of re-envisioning of Tomb Kings before the year is out.
I think it'd be nice. I'm not super, I guess, I don't really believe they're going to go that way, at least not for a while. Back in the Call of Archaon novel, there's also mentions of necrosphinxes and things like that, and that was actually one of the first books, I think the fourth or so that they did, and they're at somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 now. And then also in the audio drama series, the first one, they actually talk about a people group that Nagash conquered that lived in the Realm of Death before he fully took it over, and some of their statues and stuff sound very much like the old Tomb King stuff. So I'm not sure. Maybe I think that the biggest thing with them including these things in the narrative is an encouragement for players who still want to play with their Tomb King models. That hey, this stuff or stuff that's similar to it is in the narrative. It's cool. That's my guess.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, and if rumors are to be believed, we already have what appears to be a pretty jam-packed rest of the year. With Steamhead Dwarden supposedly in September, and then of course big Tzeentch release, the Arknights, new Lord of Change, and so on. And then I know the number of people think that the Shadowkin will be coming before the year is out with a new Malarian, new Malekith re-envisioned as Malarian model and all that fun stuff. So yeah, it might be tough for them to squeeze in a new death-oriented faction within that release window.
Yep.
Yeah,
so,
I'd love to see it.
It could just be foreshadowing.
Yeah. Let's see, what else? So, two really amazing guys I met at Adepticon earlier this year, David Griffin and Kel Thompson. Just wanted to do a quick shout out to them. David released their compact today for Redstone Rumble. It's a 2-day event happening October 15th, 16th this year in Huntsville, Alabama. So if anybody is kind of in that part of the neck of the woods, hit them up. They are amazing guys, just really cool, and I'm sure that'll be a fantastic event. I'm going to definitely try to get over there to it. And then a couple notable new podcasts. So Garage Hammer, their newest episode is out. He did it with Alex Gonzalez, who actually organized the AOS tournament at Adepticon this year. And they're going over Bone Splitters in that one, so it's this epic 4-hour long podcast episode going into all the details with the Bone Splitters. And holy hell, those guys sound nasty.
I'm probably going to have to check that one out tomorrow at work. I need things to listen to get me through my work days. So.
Yeah. Yep, me too.
Hammer's 1-year anniversary episode, 1-year anniversary for Sigmar, that just came out today as well. Unfortunately, Wayne is, so Wayne Kemp, the co-host, he's on vacation right now. So it's just Dan Heelan, joined by Russ Veal of Facehammer and Ben Curry of Bad Dice. So as you guys probably know, Russ, Ben, Wayne, and Dan were the 4 guys who were invited by GW to work with them on refining the General's Handbook, in particular the match play, points value and pitch battle scenarios. So they did a really fun 1-year anniversary episode that they released today that I highly recommend checking out.
So those are the people I have a bone to pick with. I'm just joking.
Right. Source of all of your contention right there. Yeah, and there was a lot of announcements over the weekend with the Age of Sigmar Open Day, but we'll let our friends at Warhammer Weekly tomorrow get into all that. The main thing that would be notable is the Grand Tournament was announced. That'll be returning in 2017, so that should be cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, if only they build one over here, especially since their main office is like 35 minutes away from my house. So if they build it there, I'd be like, yeah, every day.
Yeah. Do you guys think that a Warhammer World equivalent would be sufficiently successful from a bottom line, standpoint in the United States?
I've actually asked myself that question, and I do think so if they did build it next to their headquarters. And I won't go too long on it, but anyone who's familiar with DFW knows it's massive. I'm not saying it's as big as New York, but I mean it's a similar kind of thing where you really have all these smaller sub-cities within a massive, basically mega city, and we have such a large amount of gaming stores that sell GW products or other games. I mean, personally, I know of, I think, about 10 that are within a half hour of where I live, and obviously that's quite a few, and I know that they try to schedule their nights for their different games, X-Wing, AOS, 40K, whatever, on different nights because they draw such large crowds, and they want to, kind of allow everyone else. There's a good kind of partnership, right, to help everyone else do well. And so I really think that there's a large enough player base, especially for 40K. I mean, the 40K player base around here is humongous. So I know that could be a big draw for them. And then, obviously, there's a lot of other really big things like the Dallas Cowboys, the Texas Rangers, the Dallas Mavericks. We've got all the major sports teams here, and we have all these new massive entertainment complexes that are being built because all of these teams, because the Metroplex is growing so fast, continue to kind of need bigger stadiums and also just house the population. So I think that if they built it around here, it could succeed.
You forgot to mention the only team that matters in Texas, the Spurs, but that's okay.
That's actually the least important thing in Texas.
What sport is that again?
Ball. The only one the best one, basketball.
Oh, so that's the one where if you run fast and you're really tall, you win. I got it.
You can, yep. And I'll have to be
championship.
Yeah. I'll have to be careful I don't get lynched saying it's more important than football here in Texas because that's religion here.
I mean, I think it could be successful. It would have to be in a major metro area that was highly trafficked, and I would add that it needs to be somewhere that is otherwise also a tourist attraction.
Right.
And not being that familiar with the Dallas area, I don't know how much tourism really goes on there. I would say that a surefire winner would probably be if they were to build a Warhammer World in the United States, putting it in just outside of New York City would probably do really well. Somewhere that's right off a subway line,
or Los Angeles, or Orlando,
or Chicago, or.
Yeah. I was thinking Chicago because the middle of the country, it's absolutely a tourist spot. And I don't know anymore in terms of how much of a difference it really makes to have something on the coast in terms of getting people to go there. But yeah.
Yeah, right. I was more of just thinking, for example, with Orlando and LA, is they are such mega tourist traps, and you have the things like the Disney Worlds and the Disneylands and the things like that already draw massive amounts of people. So
and kids.
You could probably get a lot of people that maybe they're going on some kind of family vacation with their kids or whatever, one of those places. They're like, hey, Warhammer World's here. I'm going to spend a day there.
Yeah.
So Lego thought it was a good idea, so they built their parks there too. Yeah. Yeah. Now there's one here in DFW, so I would assume that we're a pretty good tourist location.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
that was it for news.
New York in general, I think, is probably a good bet just because of the general population density in the area. Radiating out from New York City, you're right next to New Jersey, which is the most densely populated state in the country. You have Connecticut, which is pretty highly densely populated. Rhode Island and Massachusetts right there. Pennsylvania, like eastern Pennsylvania, is pretty densely populated. And with the amount of tourism going to New York, as well as just the ease of travel in that general area, if you put it easily off of public transportation, you have millions and millions of people that could get there within, a day's drive to be able to easily have like a big event there and sustain it with just people that are not even getting on an airplane.
Right. The only thing is, why would anyone want to go there, and why would the GW people want to work there? Because everyone's so rude up in the Northeast.
Being one of those people, I have to say that's absolutely true. And you have to be careful getting too close to New Jersey, because then you just have like that odor wafting over the line, which is really unpleasant.
Yep. And then you've got people like Mitch and Ant who live there, so that's a clear sign to stay away.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you can, if you get too close to New Jersey, you can hear Mitch ranting about things coming over the hills. Oh man.
Poor Mitch. I'm sure he'll defend himself in the comments below.
I'm sure he will.
He always does. Well, I think we've railed on New Jersey enough for now. We'll obviously have to come back.
I'm just going to promote New Jersey real quick, since we are still doing the news, sort of. We've gotten a little off topic. Crossroads GT is coming up September 16th through 18th. That's in upstate New York. It's being run by the Gamer Grunts from New Jersey, though. So good shout out to them while we're on the topic of all things New Jersey. Despite all of the failings of New Jersey, they put on some excellent events. There are still slots available for Age of Sigmar, as well as I believe all of the other games. I'm not sure. I haven't seen how many slots are available for all of them. But definitely looks like that's going to be a great event. I'm hoping to be able to make it out there, but it's like a 4.5-hour drive, and I'm trying to convince other people to come with me. So we will see how that goes, but I'm definitely hoping to make it out for that one. The full tournament pack is released on the website, and we've got another 2 weeks or so until we are closing registration on that.
So better get on it if you want it. Yeah. Well, I guess that's quite a bit of news, and obviously Vince and Tom will cover even more tomorrow on Warhammer Weekly. But now it's time for the pick of the week. As always, we try to encourage and build up the other members of our Warhammer YouTuber community, because I don't think hardly any of us are making any money doing this. I know I'm certainly not. Paul, I don't think you are, unless you're hiding it all from me. But so this is the encouragement's really the best thing, right? It keeps us going, it gets us passionate, and gives us that drive to keep making more content. So I'll go ahead and start out. My pick of the week is Paul's newest bat rep, which I will include the link to below. It's great. I always enjoy Paul's content. That's why I put up with him on this show, because he puts out great content. So once again, Paul, you have my pick of the week.
Ah, fantastic, sir. I appreciate it. Tyler, what do you have for us?
Yeah, I had a couple. So there's a new channel called 2 Plus Tough. Just spell out the 2. And he's kicking out some great content. He did a little video on the best army that he thought in AOS. He's just started, as of yesterday, a series of introductory level videos. It'd be great for sharing with new folks who might be interested in getting into the game. The first one was on how to play. So just kind of going over some of the basics. He did a video reviewing the Warstorm novel. And yeah, it just seems like a very thoughtful guy. It's going to have a lot of different content. And then Ash Barker with Guerrilla Miniatures. So Ash had been doing AOS Bat Reps a number of months ago. He stopped for a while, but now he's back, and he's put out 2 new videos since the General's Handbook has dropped using the match play system. He's expanding his Stormcast army. He's got new guys coming into his studio in Canada where they play games. He is getting supported with Guerrilla Miniatures and be able to turn it into a full-time job with Patreon as his way of getting some income through it, through fans of the show. We want to see him continue doing what he's doing. He covers all kinds of games. He's a really great guy, and I love the bat reps that he's putting out on AOS, so I highly recommend that too.
I want to point out that 2 Plus Tough's channel is going to begin to explode because I think this is funny, my subscriber total really spiked whenever I was a new channel, and Tyler, whenever you mentioned one of my videos on Vince's Warhammer Weekly, I had a biggest spike near the beginning of my channel's life after that, so 2 Plus cool. Tough, be ready for a big spike once Tyler endorses you.
Yes. Yes, that's the Tyler Emerson buff.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. All right, Paul.
Mine this week, I want to give a shout-out to this week's topic of the week from Vince Venturella about bringing new blood into the game. I think that's a really, really important topic, especially now that we have the General's Handbook out. We have kind of a shift in the mentality a little bit of how the game works and what the metagame is going to be like. There actually being a metagame, how people are playing the game. There's going to be some new people coming back that had been chased off when Age of Sigmar first came out, and we've got a lot of opportunity to bring people into the game. And to a certain extent, the topic that we're going to be talking about in a couple of minutes is something that could be potentially chasing some people away. So I think bringing people into the game is really important, and I think it's going to be a really good discussion, even though it's early in the week. Just put that out a couple of days ago, so definitely check that out and check out the replies to it. I know I'm planning on doing one very soon myself. I think it's a really, really important topic. Not because I care about putting money in W's pocket, but because I care about continuing the game, expanding, always having players around to get a game with. And as long as people are out there buying models and giving money to GW, despite the fact that that's not really the point, but them staying in business and continuing to put the game out is important to the long-term health of the game.
Yep, I agree. I really want to make a response video on this too because I've tried so hard to build the community. I played the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game for years. It did really well around here around the time of the Return of the King video, or the movie. It was kind of like, I guess, the golden age for that here, and then afterwards it died down and it never really built back up with the Hobbit movies, although it's thriving, for example, in the UK. I know they have an upcoming tournament that GW's head execs are actually going to come to because it's so big. They're having, I think, it's an independent tournament, but they're having somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 120 is the number of people that are already registered just for Lord of the Rings SVG. And that game died around here, and I tried to build the community. So with Age of Sigmar kind of initially starting out, I was like, hey, I enjoy this game, work to build the community, and I'm so glad the General's Handbook is here because that's really helped the few of us that were really trying to help, kind of take off in terms of the player base. So that's something I'd definitely like to respond to.
So if we could, maybe just to touch on this for a few more minutes, to put you guys on the spot, if you had a wish list of what you would like to see the community and/or we can focus on GW the company. But of course, I mean, we're really talking about the miniature gaming industry as a whole, so this could apply to any company. What would be at the top or near the top of that list? What would be one first item on that list that you would like to see tried or done? Maybe start, or whomever wants to start.
I know I have one that I'd love to see Games Workshop produce just right off the top. I really like their start collecting boxes and their, the starter game and all of those sorts of things. What I'd really love to see them do is put out maybe a series of like 5 box sets that are, here's a 1,000 point army. Buy this box and you have an army. And that is the way that Wizards of the Coast does it with Magic the Gathering. They put out box sets and they come out every year. They keep releasing new stuff that's like, here's a deck you can go play. Just buy this one thing and you have a playable thing to go play with your friends. In one box, you don't have to think about it. It's pre-constructed. It comes with the rules. It comes with some tips and tricks for what to do with it. It gets people right in. And right now, with what Games Workshop has going on, like, yes, you can have, the start collecting boxes are a good way to get your army started, but, they've established these, 3 points levels, right, that are where everybody's going to be playing the game for the most part. So if they were to put out boxes that were just like, here's a 1,000 point army, this model's your general, it complies with all of the rules of a 1,000 point game in the General's Handbook for match play. Just maybe even throw glue in the box and say, here, you can just assemble this. Take an hour with your friends, put all these models together, and you can go throw down on the board and play. And I think that would create a really easy barrier to entry. It would eliminate a barrier to entry for a lot of players without having to kind of figure stuff out at the beginning. It just completely takes the thought process out of what they need to do to get started.
So do you want to see that replace the start collecting or be a supplement to it where it's like you can either go the start collecting route or you can buy this army in a box, 1,000 point army ready to go?
Oh, I'd just love to see it as a secondary supplemental product, and maybe rotate them, like every 6 months release some new ones so that there's constant new stuff coming out. They'll probably basically just be repacks, and they probably wouldn't be that strong of armies, but like maybe have like a behemoth in each one, have a good general in each one, have enough battle line in each one, just to have a functional army right out of a box that a new player doesn't have to think about. And then from that base, then they can grab a start collecting box and tack on more stuff to their army, or they can grab one of the other box sets or individual kits to start augmenting it. But I think having something that is 100% playable right out of the box in alignment with their rule set would be a really spot-on thing that I would love to see.
Yeah, I like that. So a few thoughts on that is that they are kind of already doing that with the start collecting boxes. If you buy, say, a couple of them or some of them,
right,
you can get up to 1,000 points. I think partly what you're saying is a reframing around more explicitly, here, buy this to have a 1,000 point army as your starting point. You make
right.
that much more explicit. Have you guys seen this spreadsheet going around the community that some people have gone through the different factions and put together 1,000 point armies and the cost to buy that army? And the costs are, I took a 20-year break, but I remember back in the mid-'90s when I was playing as 12 to 16-year-old, it was pretty expensive. It cost more than a couple $100s to put together a Warhammer army back then. And some of those prices were in like $200 to $300 range, pretty reasonable, especially historically relative to prices. So yeah, maybe I can find that link and we can include it in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we'll do that. I think it's funny that you mentioned.
That's a video that I've been meaning to do for a while. I gotta have stuff like prepped and just keep not doing it. But yeah, that's something that I've given a lot of thought to too. They've just lowered the barrier of entry so much, and I think the missing piece to really get a flood of people in with those start collecting boxes is to have them being explicitly linked to the points of the General's Handbook.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah, and maybe, maybe, I don't know, if you wanted to do like an online bundle or whatever, you can actually include the General's Handbook in that box, in case they don't have it, right? Like, it's a complete, brand new to the game, boom, here's everything you need to play match play system. I like that.
And like the book for the faction.
Yeah. I think it's funny, Tyler, that you mentioned back in the 90s that it was so expensive for you to build a Warhammer army. I was actually thinking the exact opposite, because in Lord of the Rings, the box sets used to be 24 warriors for $25, and so I kind of miss those days.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's on average probably more expensive now, or certainly over the last 5 odd years, prior to them reducing or spreading out the point cost. They still obviously have a very high premium end, but they've increased in the other end as well, or decreased, as it were. But yeah, you could be right.
Yeah, I think that if I could have, a magic wand or whatever to make whatever I wanted to come out of it, I would actually like to see an online kind of equivalent to the Star Collecting Box, or maybe they'd offer it in their stores too, where you could pick from like a couple box sets, like almost like a build your own Start Collecting. So it's like, for example, for Death, we now have 3 Start Collecting boxes because they added the Flesh Eater Court. So I'd like to see it where it's like, you have 3 or 4 general options, you have 3 or 4 battle line options, you have 3 or 4 of an elite option, and you can pick, one from here, one from here, one from here, and you get like a bundle discount or something. It doesn't have to be the same price as a Start Collecting box, but I like to see that same kind of concept, kind of like the Start Collecting, but you get a little bit more creative license in picking what you want in it. Because oftentimes I look at the Start Collecting boxes and I'm like, I'd really like to have that kit, but only want one thing out of it. It's still a good deal. I'll probably end up buying it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. So you've thought a lot about this. Yeah, also, it sounds like we're all going to be doing a response video, which we got to get on it. We don't have much time to do that. I guess we have until Friday. So, I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I mean, one thing that's really stood out to me since getting back into the hobby a year ago with AOS, a guy named Simon Sinek, he talks all the time. He did a TED Talk, famous TED Talk, about this notion of what he calls the golden circle. And the golden circle is, most of us communicate in terms of, we start out, what do you do? And we explain what we do, and we might get into how we do it, but we rarely talk about why we do what we do. Most of Warhammer and Games Workshop's communication is what and how. There's not a lot, at least in my view, on the why. And yet, I think there is a profound, meaningful mission underlying this company that most parents with kids, or even adults who are still trying to keep that inner kid alive and have some fun in their lives through this hobby, that they would be blown away by what they could get out of this hobby. I remember, when I was 12 years old, supposed to be paying attention in class, I was devouring books on army books and white dwarfs, and it was really that, and comic books was the key thing that ignited my creativity, imagination, strategic thinking. It got me interested in math and reading a ton. Like, across the board, all of these different values that we have billions of dollars in the world being poured to, and parents worrying about and wanting to unlock their kids' potential. I honestly think these things are realizable through this hobby. It's just we don't talk about it. The companies don't talk about it. The community doesn't talk about it. We don't put out enough content about it in different forms. So I think if you had a more both a bottom-up and a top-down effort that really explores in depth why Warhammer, that could be an amazing way of attracting new blood to the hobby.
Absolutely. I think, just to add to what you were saying, is like critical thinking. Like, that's something that isn't really taught anymore. At least doesn't seem to be with the whole standardized testing. Across the country, it's like teach for the test, teach for the test, teach for the test, and it's so often it. And so critical thinking is one of the first things to go, because you're teaching to a specific topic, not necessarily to how to think. And I really do think that things like this, where you have to react, any kind of strategic game where you have to think on the fly, is really something that can teach that creative or that critical thinking.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
Yeah, excellent. So Well, I had meant for my pick of the week to sort of be a segue into our main topic this week, but I guess we had a little bit of a diversion in the middle there.
It's in the same vein.
Yeah, it's all good. So what we have been seeing now that we've got the General's Handbook out, we've had a few tournaments start taking place using the General's Handbook, and we've seen a metagame start to develop, and there have been some pretty nasty, highly skewed lists showing up at the top tables. So we wanted to kind of visit those ideas, talk about how those lists are being constructed, maybe some ways to counter those lists, maybe some other ideas that we could start messing around with in that sort of min-maxing capacity, as well as what might be better strategies beyond that, what the next step in the metagame is. So Tyler, I'm going to let you lead off, sir, because you were the one that had actually originally shot us a message just sort of asking the question about this. So what are you seeing in the lists at the top tables recently?
Right. Yeah, just for more context, so why I wanted to talk about it with you guys, kind of the broader topic is the values, the culture, the intentionality at the level of our individual selves, and then the level of the collective, of the community as a whole. And so we'd love to get into that kind of broader conversation,
Absolutely.
about what kind of values and intentions and culture with probably different pockets of different, it's like you can have, one thing that seems clear with AOS is you can have a lot of different people with different value sets, and they can find a place. And, it's nice to see, as Russ put it on Keelan Hammer's podcast that came out today, GW telling him, like, you're a customer that we value as well. Russ Veal is a highly competitive player, one of the more successful AOS competitive players out there right now. But yeah, with that in mind, I put together a couple of lists that I think are interesting. I don't think they're excessively filthy, but that could be pretty good from a general purpose standpoint in terms of going to tournaments, playing in 3 to 5 games over a couple of days, and different scenarios, and being able to do reasonably well. I think these lists definitely have holes, but they're pretty interesting. So I'll start off with Sylvaneth. I started a Let's Chat Sylvaneth thread on the TGA, the Grand Alliance community, tga.community, started up by Ben Curry. If anybody who doesn't know about it, definitely check it out. It's amazing. It's probably the leading forum right now in terms of like in-depth discussion about the game. And so I've been looking at kind of analyzing Sylvaneth in depth, and some of the working conclusions is that they definitely have some units that appear to be, again, this is from a match play standpoint, that appear to be distinctly overpriced, and it's very difficult to find a role for them in a general purpose competitive list. The Spite Revenants and the Tree Revenants stand out the most. So these are the new models, the new kind of elite infantry kit that came out with the new release. You get 5 of them for 100 points. They just can't do much. So like the Tree Revenants in particular were the ones that have some very compelling rules, but the key challenge that personally I'm finding with them is that they hit on a 4+. They're supposed to be elite elves, and elite elves historically would always hit on a 3+, wound on a 3+. So they've got a 5-up save, they only have 1 wound, you're paying 100 points for 5 of them. So they're pretty difficult to take in my view. From a min-maxing standpoint, personally, just based on what I've seen so far, it seems to me that you're going to want to focus on Dryads at your minimum and Kurnoth Hunters at your maximum. Kurnoth Hunters are by far the best buy in this army. They are amazing. They've got 3 builds, great bows, scythes, and great swords. They all have different advantages, disadvantages. The thing with the great bows is that they hit on a 4-up, so you might want to take a Celestial Huracanum to buff them to get a +1 to hit, which is what Rob Symes did, a guy who won the South Coast GT and just won Ben Curry and Ben Johnson's Alliance the other weekend ago. He was running 3 Huracanums, but they cannot stack, but they can deal out a huge number of mortal wounds with their spells and abilities. So Scythes are very powerful in terms of their ability to get through armor. They're at a -2 rend. They do D3 damage. The swords are 2 damage each, -1 rend, but 1 more attack. So the math probably says that the great swords are the best all around. I like to run scythes because I keep finding myself in situations where it's like I'm facing units that have ignore -1 rend, or that I need the 2-inch reach on the sides because I'm fighting on a terrain piece, or I'm fighting by Sylvaneth Wildwoods. With Sylvaneth, they really need to take advantage of the Wildwoods. So, with those 3 woods on the bases, you can get in some very tight situations where you need that 2-inch reach, and it's difficult to pile in. So I like the scythes overall, but the great swords are pretty good as well. So yeah, put together a Sylvaneth list that tried to do a little bit of min-maxing, and one that I think would be quite competitive. And let me try to share a screen here.
Sure, we're locked on you, and I was just going to say real quick, I don't think you can also overvalue the psychological aspect that -2 rend brings. Like, I talk a lot about how, the psychology of the games, and how, certain things you'll actually get additional value out of if someone's not as familiar with it. It might be the scary thing. They're like, oh, I overcommit to that, or I undercommit, I try to avoid it, whatever it is. That's a huge aspect of the game that you can take advantage of. And also with the Karanoth Hunters, the range. You lack range if you play a purely Sylvaneth army or a very heavy army, and they provide, I'd say, pretty good shooting abilities.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, 30-inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
That's practically artillery.
I also want to point out that 30 inches is kind of misleading. That's a big range. Don't get me wrong, but with their teleporting basically abilities, that's right. The whole battlefield basically.
Right. Yeah, and they just for anyone not familiar with the Karanoth Hunters, I haven't looked at a lot of armies yet. I've just kind of been focusing on Sylvaneth and a couple of others. I need to go through a lot of the other armies, but they're one of the best values in the game right now, based on what I've looked at. 180 points for 3 of them. You get 5 wounds each, 15 wounds. You can do a huge amount of damage. Some of the abilities, so they have this trample underfoot. For each one, locked in combat, within 1 each of an enemy model, for each one, it can do a mortal wound on a 4-up. So that gives you a little bit more damage. And then when they're locked in, and you don't have to worry about moving them around much, they get this ability, Tangle, Thorn, Thicket, that allows them to reroll their armor saves. So if you have those guys...
It's absurd, because they're getting the plus, if you put them in the terrain, which you should be, they're getting a +1 to their armor save and rerolling it. Yeah, these guys are crazy.
Yeah, as most armies, I would say, Sylvaneth are vulnerable to mass mortal wound output, and that's certainly the weakness of the Karanoth Hunters. But barring that, yeah, if you're running a unit of 6, great sword or scythe-wielding Karanoths in a Sylvaneth Wildwood with Mystic Shield, yeah, good luck taking those guys down.
Right.
It's arguably one of the best units in the game. So, can you see this list?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. Oh, should I do screen share, or you want to lock on me?
Yeah, I'm locked on you, but you go ahead and hit screen share, and it'll stay focused.
Okay, forgive the noob.
It's okay, we still struggle with this every single time anyway. It's never as smooth as it is on other shows.
We'll get there.
Alright, how about now?
Not yet.
Let's see. Oh.
There we go.
Alright, good.
Alrighty, we're good.
Okay, awesome.
Also, I'm going to point out to our audience, I will link this particular website below, but scrollbuilder.com is incredible. I've been using it for a long time. It's a great way to build your force really quickly and easily. And obviously, as you can see here, details everything from leader, behemoth, battle line, all that kinds of stuff.
Yeah, shout out to Tony P. I don't know his last name, but he's Tony P on Twitter. This dude is a workaholic. I mean, I don't know if he probably works for a living too, but it almost seems like this is a full-time job for him. I see him up at 3 a.m. working on scrollbuilder.com. It seems like every day he's working on this thing. Tony, if you're listening, you should set up a Patreon, and I would happy send some money your way, because it is a massive amount of work that he has been putting into this for, I don't know, at least a better part of half a year, and is going to continue doing it. He's been working on this for a while.
Yep.
Okay, so Spirit of Dorothea, so 2,000 points, again, the goal of general purpose competitive list building. Spirit of Dorthu comes in at 400 points. It's pretty expensive, but he's just a powerhouse.
He hits like a truck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wanna keep him healed, because if at full health, or I think it is 0 to 2 wounds, he is at 6 damage, and he's doing 3 attacks. If you gun him within 3 inches of a Sylvaneth Wild, which ideally you should at all times, you're not always going to be able to do that, but hopefully a lot of the times he'll be doing 3 attacks plus D3 attacks, 3 up, 2 up, 3 up, 3 up, -2 rends. Yeah, so he's a beast.
And then there's also, if you choose to pick your relics from order instead, you can give him an additional attack on that weapon as well. So there's lots of ways to make him absurd.
Yeah. So in terms of it remains to be seen what tournaments are going to be doing. If you're going to have random rolls on the command traits and artifacts of power, etc. But if you can pick the loadout that is increasingly already common is Gnarled Warrior for the command trait, and that's ignore -1 rend. So extremely good when you've got Dorthu at 3 up, save, and Mystic Shield 2 up. And then for the Artifact of Power, the Briar Sheath. So that's ignore -1 to hit. Or sorry, -1 to hit in general, not just in combat. And of course, all the tree lords, they have Ground Shaking Stomp, which on a 4 up can give you another -1 to hit.
Yep.
And that stuff stacks. So he's pretty amazing. I've only used him once so far, but it was pretty scary what he could do. The Branch Witch is there to stay within 18 inches of him and cast Regrowth. I'm running a battalion with this list so that I can give the Branch Witch an Artifact of Power as well. And going to give the Branch Witch the Renews Lemon-Tiri, if I'm pronouncing that right. And that is a +1 to cast on normal spells, Mystic Shield, Arcane Bolt, and so on, and then a +2 to cast on the Deepwood spells. So the Sylvaneth, as we're going to be seeing with these new factions, most of the new factions, they have their own spell lore. So they also have Regrowth. It is a healing spell that can do D6 healing wounds, heal wounds, up to 18 inches of the Branch Witch. So he's there to cast that with a +2 to cast to keep Dorthu healed up.
It's also important to mention, I think that one says it, it's been a little bit since I looked at the Battle Tome. Doesn't that one say that it doesn't replace dead models, only heals ones that are still on the table?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then, so like I said, the battalion, which I'm not showing on this list, but the battalion is the Free Spirits Battalion. That's only 40 points. It is Spirit of Dorthu plus 3 units of Kurnoth Hunters. And what that gives you is, I think it's called Swift Vengeance, which allows you to take an extra move for Dorthu, the 3 units of Kurnoth Hunters, in your hero phase. So they move 5 inches each, and that is 10-inch move. When you combine with their movement phase, they can run. So an amazing tactic that I've found is in games where it's advantageous, or generally advantageous, to place if you're Sylvaneth Allegiance, you get to place 1 Sylvaneth Wildwood at the beginning of the game before people pick territories. And so 1 Sylvaneth Wildwood is up to 3 of those Citadel wood bases, which are like 11 inches wide or something. They're very, very wide. They can take up a lot of space. And I don't recommend doing 3 of them on a 3x3 on a 4x4, 4x6. But so you place those wildwoods in the middle of the table. That way you don't really have to worry about which side of the deployment you get. You then move up your Dorthu and Kurnoth Hunters, and you should be able to get them within range of that Sylvaneth Wildwood. You plant them down, and then you're giving the opponent potentially some tough decisions to make. Do I, in my turn, run up and try to take them on in that Wildwood, running risk of if you have a model run across and is charge across or end movement on a Sylvaneth Wildwood on a 1, they're automatically slain. Of course, I'm getting cover from being in the Wildwood. Or do I stay back and let them come at me? It's a very powerful kind of swift attack without actually needing to teleport with that unit. So I found that pretty effective.
So with this formation, because you didn't already specify, are you bringing all those Kurnoth Hunters with bows? Are you alternating their builds, or did you don't necessarily have that in mind prior to actually the tournament?
Yeah, so we obviously would specify going into the tournament. The way I've built out the list is, so of course we have the 3 units of Dryad. You got to have 3 battle line units. So these are for the holding objectives, contesting objectives as needed, teleporting between Sylvaneth Wildwoods. The Kurnoth Hunters, so a lot of Kurnoth Hunters. We've got 6 units. What I had in mind for this is 3 units with great bows to give you some pretty good long-range threats. Help, for example, if you're facing Stonehorns, you can take some of the wounds off of them, get them down to where they cannot do 6. I think in the case of Thunder Test, they couldn't do an automatic 6 mortal wounds. You'd get a few wounds off of them. And then the other 3 Kurnoth Hunters would be 2 with scythes and 1 with great swords. So yeah, those 3 with the scythes and great swords, the combat ones, they would be the units in the battalion running with Durthu for doing the damage in combat. But I like it. What I like about this list, it gives you some nice flexibility with these 3 Great Bow Kurnoth Hunter units. You can stand back and deal quite a bit of damage from range. You don't necessarily have to be aggressive. You can hang back a little bit. You could do both, in terms of your positioning with the Kurnoth Hunters, where you focus the Sylvaneth Wildwoods, which is going to block line of sight on those Kurnoth Hunters in many situations because of the trees. You kind of focus them to one side of the table, and then you reorient your Kurnoth Hunters to give them good line of sight to pick off characters or whatever it might be in terms of who you need to take out or reduce. So yeah, that's kind of the general list.
Sounds almost like you've got this Normandy beach kind of defensive bulkhead set up, very much like the Germans did, where you've got these tank traps and things, and then you've got the killing field, right? Like the kill zone before they even get to you. So
right, right.
Clearly, it's a good idea. I mean, militaries have used it for years. Yeah. Paul, do you want? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have another list, Tyler? Or
yeah. Do you guys have any thoughts or questions on this one? I mean, there's a lot more that I could say, but I don't want to spend 30 minutes on each one.
I think I get it. I like it. I like the Spirit of Durthu. I mean, obviously, he's just sitting there with the baseball bat ready to knock the opponent's models off the table. And the Kurnoth Hunters, I agree. I think they're amazing. First off, I love the models, but I think that their stats are amazing. I like the Sylvaneth. I like their aesthetic. I've always liked the kind of intish look.
Yeah.
And just with how good they are on the table, they really make me want to play a Sylvaneth army as kind of a secondary army. One thing I really think, too, that should be mentioned is that the bow-armed models, while they're not incredible in close combat like their close combat builds are, they're certainly no slouches. So you don't have to be terrified of an opponent actually reaching them. They can fend for themselves pretty well.
That's true, yeah. Against certain armies, you could be aggressive with them. You can move them up, get them in Wildwoods, give them additional cover save. Yeah, you could use them in multiple ways depending on who you're facing.
And then you can always reorganize your entire force so well, as you were mentioning, like with the Sylvaneth Wildwoods being in the middle. It almost sounds like that classic 3-cup hustler chick where you've got the ball or the marker underneath and they're moving around. You can kind of almost be shifting your Sylvaneth units like that with the 3 Wildwoods. It's like which one's really where. Yeah, I like it. You can really soak and fuse it into your opponent. You can react quickly. You've got good range. You have lots of units that can take a beating and tie down an opponent. You've got your Dryads and stuff for holding objectives, while your Kurnoths just keep the entire opposing army busy because that's what they do.
Right.
You have your Branch Witch, which can heal Spirit of Durthu or your Kurnoth Hunters because they're 5 wound models apiece. So clearly that's good. Yeah, I think this one's good, and unless you have a hard counter list built to it, could really do well against almost anything, or against most armies. I hesitate to say almost anything.
Yeah, it definitely has weaknesses, and I certainly haven't play tested this against some of the real filth that we know is out there. Massive number of shots coming from Bone Splitters, or even combat-oriented Bone Splitters with a large number of synergies with all the combos that you can get. 4 Beast Claw, 4 Stonehorns / Thunder Tusk running at you on first turn, doing massive mortal wounds. There are some filthy lists that I want to run this against and see how it does, but relative to a lot of lists that I put together with Sylvaneth, this one is more interesting, the most interesting, arguably, at least as of now. There's also an alternative with Alariel that I think is interesting. It's challenging with her because she's 620 points, and she's not a combat beast. She is a synergy-oriented kind of special character who can deal out some nice benefits, like her capacity to heal wounds. So she can do D3 healed wounds per your hero phase, which would be phenomenal with a Kurnoth Kurnoth heavy list. And it's per model, D3 wounds healed. But you really would need to keep her alive to really, if Alarielle dies in that list, I would say you're going to be hard pressed to compete as well as you could if Durthu died in this list. I think it's less risk that you're taking if Durthu dies than you would be if you're running Alarielle. You also, of course, you get Durthu and an additional Kurnoth Hunter for 580 points with 40 points left over relative to what you would get with Alarielle. So you could get. Anyway, yeah. Any thoughts, Paul?
No, I feel like you really covered that really well. I do like this. I think the Kurnoth Hunters are really a really good value for points that you're paying for them, especially for the Sylvaneth. They're really like your go-to for everything, and they're going to hit really hard. They're going to take a lot of damage, and their special abilities are really going to, and the synergy is going to give them a lot of power.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Do you guys want me to go into the next list, or do you want to go?
Why don't you go ahead, Tyler, and then we'll go.
Okay, cool. So this next one, I started to think of another list that was outside of Sylvaneth that had a little bit of fluff to it, a little bit of a theme. I've always been an elven player, and
I see you took Paul's advice and threw in the single Gryph-hound.
Oh yeah.
Paul, for those of you who don't know, Paul made an entire video on his YouTube channel on basically why, if you're playing an Order faction, you should throw in a single Gryph-hound into every list you bring, and I will link that below because it was brilliant.
Okay, if not 2 or 3, if you can afford it, depending on your makeup. Yeah, they are amazing. They're warning cry stacks, so. Unless you're playing in a tournament that is house ruling, you cannot use the same ability more than once, which personally I think that is a nice house rule for tournament settings because you can get some pretty crazy stacking going on in this game. It would be nice another rule of 1 they could add, a 4th rule of 1 in that regard. Okay, so yeah, this list is themed around kind of protection-oriented elves. It's got a kind of Highish and a Zero theme going with a couple of Luminarchs of Highish and 1 Celestial Huracanum. The general, kind of what got me interested in thinking about this was first off looking at Rob Symes' list from a weekend ago that we talked about earlier from the Alliance event. He won that event running 3 battle line units of 10 Glade Guard each, so what you're seeing there, plus like 9 Kurnoth Hunters with great bows, 3 Celestial Huracanums, and 2 or 3 Gryph-hounds, something like that was his list. Immensely powerful shooting and mortal wound output. But again, he didn't face Paul Whitehead with his Stonehorn focus list that I think Rob would have really struggled with. So this list kind of was inspired by it, but it's more oriented around protection rather than purely kind of more defensive rather than offensive. So 3 Glade Guard, they're just amazing as battle line unit. They have the ability, they can do -3 rend once per battle. So 30 shots, you can buff them to get them up to 3 up to hit. Actually 2 up to hit because they get a +1 to hit it's 20 models, isn't it, for Glade Guard, so you wouldn't get that with them. So they would be at a 3 up to hit with this list with 1 Celestial Huracanum if they're within 10 inches of its portents of battle. So 3 up to hit, 4 up to wound, -3 rend, you're going to be dealing a lot of damage, at least in one phase, and a pretty steady stream of damage from them in your back line. 2 units of 10 Phoenix Guard, they're expensive, but in terms of this list and the number of aura or ward or feel no pain stacks that you can get with them, I think they're a pretty good choice as your tanking units to hold up the Stonehorns or the Kurnoth Hunters or the Dracothian Guard or whomever that comes charging in, and you need to take a charge, hold them up for a couple of combat rounds to deal more shooting and more mortal wound damage with your Glade Guard and your Luminarch of Highishes. So you've got 2 of those. They have Searing Beams of Light, which are going to be, again, if they're within range of the Celestial Huracanum, I think it's a 2 up, 2 up is what they would be. -2 rend, 6 damage each if they are not hurt. So they've got a 30-inch range. So extremely nasty long-range shooting. And then they have Aura of Protection, which within all your units within 10 inches of them provides a 6-up feel no pain save, ward save. I believe these can stack. I could be wrong. Do you guys know otherwise?
I don't. The only way that I guess the way I interpret it, because whenever you mentioned this, I started looking at my death list and I was reading the Mortis engine and the other kind of buff wagons like that. The wording for mine say if they are within range of any Mortis engines, so obviously more than one, you'd still receive just the +1. So if it says this unit confers a +1 to whatever, then I would assume that that can actually stack. If it just says within range of any, then naturally that's going to mean one or more. You only get the single +1.
Right. Yeah, it did not specify. I would need to look back, but I don't believe it specified the any qualification, which it does with the Celestial Huracanum's Portents of Battle. And GW actually clarified that yeah, you cannot stack Portents of Battle to get multiple pluses to hit. But it did not do that with the Luminarch of Hysh. I could be wrong, and feel free to point it out if anybody notices otherwise. I'll go back and look.
I think the Luminarch is worded the same way.
Okay.
I was actually just looking at that the other day. I'm not sure if that save is going to not stack like that, but I know the buff to casting is.
Yeah, we can. While we're talking here, while you guys are talking, I'll pull it up. So yeah.
I have to say, I love that list because you have 2 horse-drawn Deathstars, and that's the one model I really want from the Free People's kind of former Empire stuff, just because I love the giant laser beam of death.
Yeah. And at only 240 points, it is a really good deal. I think it's probably undercosted. I haven't actually had a chance to put it on the table yet. But that's actually one of my picks for this overall as well. Looking at potential skewed lists, really just using that whole Collegiate Arcane War Council battalion.
Yeah.
Stacking up your +1s to cast with that battalion to be able to get either auto-casting or almost auto-casting. I guess we were having a discussion before the show about, actually I think it was yesterday maybe, about can you get spells that auto-cast, can you get something down to a 2 casting value and not miscast on 2? I guess that's one question that we can try and throw over to GW at some point. If the rule of 1 somehow applies to that, or if it's in the spirit of the rule of 1s. Anyway.
Yeah. And the same thing with charges, really, because there's certain things that give you a +3 inch to your charge or whatever. So you could still stop with outside the 3 inches and even roll Snake Eyes and make it within the ½ inch required of one model to get within the combat range. I think that at least for now, it really depends on the rule of 1, the exact wording. Because I know that it talks about with the attacks and all that, your ones always fail, and then it says something I think to the effect of you can't have an automatic hit or not. It specifically says there is no automatic to hit or to wound or something like that. It would depend on how that's worded. For me, at least for now, before GW officially rules on it, to whether or not I would say automatic charges or automatic casting or automatic anything like that is allowed.
Yep.
Right. So here's the wording on Aura of Protection. Well, first off, it's a 3-up to hit and 3-up to wound normally. So with Portents of Battle from the Huracanum, that would be a 2-up to hit and 3-up to wound on its Searing Beam of Light. I just had that wrong. Okay, so Aura of Protection, you can roll a dice each time an order model from your army suffers a wound or mortal wound whilst within range of a Luminarch's Aura Protection ability. On a 6, that attack is deflected by the aura, and that wound is ignored. What do you guys think?
Can you read that first part one more time?
You can roll a dice each time an order model from your army suffers a wound or mortal wound whilst within range. You can roll a dice each time
And it says within range of...
Within range of a Luminarch's aura of protection ability.
Yeah,
I would say you
that
only
that
get
does
the
not
one.
stack.
That does not stack.
Yeah, because I would say if you're within range of 2 of them, you're still within range of of an aura. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the gentlemanly way to play it anyway. So yeah, we will just go with that, and I think that's how most tournaments are going to be playing, not allowing these kinds of things to stack. But regardless, I think it's an interesting list. You know, you can get with Archmage, you can get Shield of Sapphire. Even if you cannot stack, you could spread out your 2 Luminarchs to where you should be able to get most of your army to benefit from at least one of them. And so you could get, with the Archmage, Shield of Sapphire, a Luminarch, that would be 2 additional 6-up ward saves, on top of Phoenix Guards, 4-up normal save, plus its 4-up Witness to Destiny. With the Frost Phoenix, things get especially crazy in terms of the number of saves you can be getting. So you would get its 4-up save, which is going to be buffed to 2-up in most cases because of the Attune to Magic ability. When spells are going off within, 9, 12 inches of it, each time a spell is cast, not even, I think, successfully cast, but just cast, it adds 1 to its armor save. So most of the time it's going to be running with a 2-up save with all the magic in this list. And then it's 4-up Witness to Destiny, potentially 2 more 6-up ward saves, and finally a 3rd ward save with Master of Defense as its command trait from the Order Allegiance abilities. So yeah, that Frostheart Phoenix would be a pain in the ass to take down with all those buffs.
Definitely.
Yeah. Definitely.
Anyway, yeah, I thought it's kind of a fun list. I think it definitely has a lot of flaws. It's got some nice long-range shooting. You're doing a ton of Mortal Wound output with this list. With the Common of Cassandora and the Storm of Shemtek with the Huracanum, you should be able to do some good damage with 2 up to hit, 3 up to wound from these 2 Searing Beams of Light. You've got your 30 shots from Glade Guard. You've got your 2 units to try to tank, to keep shooting the 2 units with the Phoenix Guard to keep tanking. So yeah, that's a pretty cool list.
Yeah, definitely.
Paul, do you want to go ahead and cover yours?
I really don't have so much specific lists as, overall the thought seems to be that, going really heavy on, an undercosted behemoth and going and just maxing out on the number of those seems to currently be like the optimal sort of thing to do. Would you guys seem to agree?
I would say either that or an elite-ish infantry or something, because obviously, Chronoth Hunters aren't a behemoth, but kind of that monstrous infantry. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked enough at the armies at large. It does seem, though, that there are forces out there that you could put a huge number of models on the table and be pretty effective. In particular, Bone Splitters is obviously coming to mind because you can buy 10 of them at 2 wounds each for 100 points. You can get 20 wounds for 100 points, and you can buff them in so many different ways that they're dealing out a lot of damage. Flesh Eater Quartz, I would imagine you could probably get quite a bit in terms of their ghouls and their abilities and their capacity to replenish units. I would imagine there's some armies that you could do pretty well with a large model count.
Yep. And I think busting out of the mindset that a lot of us have had from 8th edition of staying within one faction, I think is really going to give you some huge benefits. In particular, I can think of throwing in your Celestial Huracanum into a Stormcast list, and all of a sudden you have Stormcasts that are hitting on 2s.
Stormcasts that are what Stormcast should have been, yes.
Yes, exactly. And it gives you that magic supplement that the Stormcast are missing, and it seems like that's kind of the way to go. Is that you've got the list with the Stonehorns. What is their battle line unit that they're running? It was Savage Orcs, right?
Yep.
2 different factions that traditionally you wouldn't ever play those 2 together.
Right.
it seems like people are working mainly under, a Grand Alliance and mixing the most powerful stuff possible out of various different places. And, if you're somebody that has a large collection, a lot of different armies, you can mix and match really well. And, you go across those lines and suddenly, you're putting a Hurricanum in a Stormcast list, you're putting a Hurricanum in a Seraphon list, or mixing a Hurricanum into your Sylvaneth. And, those Kurnoth Hunters are suddenly really, really nasty when they've got a Hurricanum behind them. Or, if you're going for a really tough list, you've got, your, what am I thinking of? Something out of the Seraphon, you have like battle line units that are going to have a 4-up save that are ignoring Rend 1 and have a 6-up ward save off of a Luminarch, plus, a Mystic Shield to give them, a 3-up save.
Put them in terrain, you're looking at a 2-up, yeah.
Yeah, suddenly you get these really super tanky things from mixing different factions. And I think that's really, for now anyway, I think that's going to be a really big way to go. And as we see more stuff come out, though, as we saw with the Sylvaneth book, I think we're going to get more and more incentive to play in faction, and these skewed lists that we have now from mixing factions in really wild and crazy ways, I think that's going to kind of subside a little bit, because you're going to have the choice between, do I take really crazy faction-specific abilities, or do I take these really crazy combinations?
Right. Good points.
Yeah, although, I mean, it does. We were talking earlier about, before we got on air, the 3 new factions, Sylvaneth, Bone Splitters, and Beastclaw Raiders, and it's still early days, and I know many people get upset when they hear, let's say folks like us who are doing a YouTube show, and we're talking about this, and we're maybe perceived to be overreacting to the latest new cool toys in terms of their power, and give it a minute to see people put together some lists to try to counter it. So with that in mind, it does seem that it's fair to say Beastclaw Raiders and Bone Splitters are very powerful, just within faction. And Sylvaneth is pretty powerful. I think it has more limitations in terms of competitive list builds that would really, really work, general purpose-wise. But so I hear more about these 2 in particular that I feel like I necessarily heard about lists that would pick a little bit from Stormcast and a little bit from Wood Elves or whatnot. Although, yeah, certainly you do have. We had seen a number of those lists as well, but I think that's kind of interesting that what we've seen so far with at least 2 of the 3 factions.
I think too with the Sylvaneth is that they might be on the same power level, but I think that they require a more deft hand to really use them, because they are so much more of that finesse army when compared to the other 2.
Very much so, yeah, that appears to be true. I wouldn't necessarily claim running 15 to 18 Kurnoth Hunters requires a lot of finesse, so we'll see if that's going to be true. But in general, I think you're absolutely right. And even then, it could, against certain lists, it could require a fair amount of finesse. Well, I mean, what do you guys think about, in terms of the meta? I mean, it seems to me that we are very heavily still in favor of mortal wound output damage. We're very skewed toward offensive output relative to defensive capacity. Like, I was trying to play around with that last list in terms of building up some defensive capacity to see what you could get. I didn't run the math on it to see what it would even look like to have 2 6-up ward saves. Would that make much of a difference on some of those units when they're dealing with some very strong offense coming their way? Even 2 concussors, Dracothian Guard, or 1 Stonehorn, just in terms of some of the more powerful units, or 100 shots from a Bone Splitters unit coming their way. So what do you guys think in terms of offense versus defense right now?
I do think it's strongly offensively weighted, and I've mentioned it before. Vince did a game design video talking about how offense over defense makes a better overall game design for your players to enjoy. It's actually, funnily enough that you mentioned it, this is it with the most recent kind of FAQ stuff that GW put out about the way that these command traits and all work, that I got really upset about with the Death faction, because I thought we can be that one army that's an anvil, because the Lord of the Night or whatever it was changed your 6-up word across your entire army, so long as they're within 10 inches of a hero, to a 5-up. But then they specified that that's only within the range of your commander.
Oh,
So
10
initially
inches.
I thought, wow, we have amazing defense, and I actually played 2 games like that before they clarified it, and it was incredible. Like, the damage that a zombie, which has no save initially, can take. I mean, the defense was incredible, and it was the perfect mortal wound counter because zombies can regenerate anyways, and also, like, I really thought death was the answer to the mortal wound army before this semi-nerf. But I definitely think that with that, the one chance to really have that defensive powerhouse is not there yet, and so the game, I think, definitely skews heavily towards mortal wound output and just raw amounts of firepower that you can put out, because there's rend and there's not a whole lot of things that counter rend. I mean, there's some units that say you ignore neg 1, some even that say you ignore anything less than neg 3, and even less that say you ignore it all. But rend is very powerful, and there's far more things that have rend than things that give you bonuses to your defense.
Mm.
Yeah. I think the obvious thing, at least from my experience with gaming, right? I'm relatively new to tabletop gaming. I've only been playing Warhammer in general probably since, I would say, like a little over a year and a half, probably, right? But on and off, I've been playing Magic the Gathering for like 12 years. I played the Star Trek collectible card game for years. I've played various other types of strategy games where new things are being released and added. And the consistent thing that I always see is this. The first thing out of the gate when there is a new release or a new major rules change, it's the highly aggressive strategy. It's the obvious beat you over the head thing. And that's what we're having right now. We're in this phase of min-maxing the most aggressive list possible. And then what comes later on is the slower, more defensive sort of list. And right now we're talking about, offense versus defense, but we haven't even really defined how you build the defensive list in Age of Sigmar yet. Like, what does that really look like?
Yeah.
Is that like a shooting gunline list? Is that something with high armor saves and protection from mortal wounds? Is it, having really effective screening units to tee up your charges, or any number of other things? And we haven't really seen a lot of lists yet that are designed around those defensive aspects. And as you were really pointing out, like with the Sylvaneth, that's an army that could potentially be highly defensive, right? Like the Wood Elves in 8th edition were a very defensive sort of army. They would hit and fade all the time, and it was hard to hit them. And they would just do damage from a distance a lot. Could we see that now with Age of Sigmar, with a list running a lot of fast cavalry that can shoot? I certainly could see that with a variety of different armies. With free people, with the elves, with maybe if you can get some buffs into your Tomb King's horse archers, do some damage. I mean, those things are really cheap too, aren't they?
Yeah, Tomb King. Yeah, Tyler Mingle at Adepticon was running a list of Tomb Kings with a lot of chariots, and it's amazing the speed that they can get.
Yeah, and all of that though is like we haven't seen people countering the lists yet.
Yeah.
All we've seen is that initial surge of here is the really obvious offensive strategy, and we haven't gotten that counter to it yet. Pre-General's Handbook, what was the thing that everybody was worried about on a highly offensive strategy, or even a highly defensive strategy? Summoning. Summon, summon, summon. That was the thing everybody was concerned about. Now that's been nerfed to a point that it's not that big of a concern anymore. So now what's the concern? Undercosted units. So people are going to run undercosted units that are highly aggressive. And what's next after that? Well, people are going to realize what the counters are to those units and maybe why they're not actually really undercosted. You know, if you're running, you know, that Stonehorn list, and suddenly you run up against a Tomb Kings player playing with like 2 Necrosphinxes, you're screwed. Like, you're gonna lose that game, even with 2 Necrosphinxes. Never mind running like 4 of them, and a 4 Necrosphinx list against pretty much anything that's, you know, any balanced list that's going to be pretty strong as well. You know, I fully expect to see that coming pretty soon, you know, seeing those kinds of lists. There's plenty of units out there that get bonuses when they are fighting against monsters. You know, questing knights come to mind.
Yeah.
I mean, with the kind of skew that we're seeing towards people running a lot of behemoths, most of them are monsters. A lot of the new hot units that are coming out are monsters that people want to run. You know, we've got the Stonehorns, we've got the Magma Droths, we've got the Maw Crushers, the Star Drakes, all of these things that everybody wants to run, and everybody's going to run at least one of them in their list. So if you run a unit of questing knights or a unit of, you know, pick another thing that gets bonuses against monsters, you're going to get a huge advantage. Suddenly that seemingly undercosted monster is just hitting the bin turn 2. and all of a sudden that was like 500 points just down the drain to a 200-point unit.
I would point out that you're, at least what you're defining in that description, if you will, of defensive is basically an offense that can be someone else's offense, right? So it's like you're basically saying that the best defense is a good offense, and because, you know, if you're using the gunline example, like, it's their damage output, it's their offensive capability that's, now you're using it in a holding back way, you're letting that charge come to you. Sure, you're playing more of a slower tempo game, to touch on, you know, the episode we did with Vince, but when I think of like a defensive unit, I think of something that can take a beating, it can tank. And, you know, so I look at every tabletop game I've ever played prior to Age of Sigmar, and every single game has that tanky army. In X-Wing, it's the Rebels. They have more shields, they tend to have more hull points and all than the Empire. The Empire tends to have more overall offensive firepower to their army, so they're very much more that offense to the opponent's defense. In Lord of the Rings, there were armies like the people of Minas Tirith or the dwarves that you're rocking these incredibly high defenses that it's very, very hard, even for the best offensive armies, to cut through them. Each wound, you basically have to throw so many attacks at them that you eventually kill them. And in Age of Sigmar, I don't think we have that. I don't think that currently, with how the rules are, that we have that army that can really tank everything. Now, we have units that on their own, like, again, the Stonehorns or whatever, that can reduce the number of wounds they take from an attack by half or whatever, that can tank. But I don't look at any army that's truly that defensive anvil to someone else's unstoppable hammer.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, too, that we haven't really explored yet is how much does Battle Shock matter. And, you know, there's lists out there that you could put together. Like, I've messed around with it in my Bloodbound list. You can build a bravery debuff list, and suddenly you're blowing half of your opponent's models off the board with Battle Shock, not with actual combat damage.
I'd have to actually pay attention to that list, because normally Battle Shock is something my opponent does, not me. Because most of my guys are rocking like 10-ish leadership, so yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so, but if you have, you know, something debuffing you, then suddenly it becomes a problem. And you lose a few models, and you roll high on your Battle Shock, and you're debuffed a little bit, and suddenly you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Quite possibly.
And I mean, so I know that this has been touched on a lot in discussions over the first year of Age of Sigmar, and it should continue to be true going forward. Is TOs designing, and again, mostly in the context of competitive tourney play, TOs designing scenarios that in aggregate are that they dramatically increase the aggregate balance across factions, because you can't just rock up with a very powerful Sylvaneth list or whatever list and expect to do well in all of those scenarios based on their design. And we've talked a lot about Beastclaw Raiders and those 4 Stonehorns. That's certainly the case with that list. There are many scenarios that even a few of them within the General's Handbook list are challenging for Beastclaw Raiders, at least that kind of list, because they have such a low model count. They're really incentivizing. I mean, they appear to be on the surface. They appear to be incentivizing a very high model count armies.
Right.
In terms of to hold these objectives, you need to have 5 or more models within 6 inches, and you got to keep models outside of 6 inches, and all these different ways that they're doing that. And I say on the surface because you have ways that you can take out a ton of models rapidly.
Right.
But I generally I like that. I mean, I was listening to Bravery One, and they were joking about a giant rat list where they would swarm the board with hundreds and hundreds of giant rats, and you would never be able to kill, mathematically, you would never be able to kill enough rats in objectives that are based on having model count or model count oriented to actually win that game. I guess maybe if you could keep enough alive, you could try to win on victory points, but I don't think, hopefully we're not going to be seeing a lot of that nonsense in terms of the list that people are running, because that just doesn't sound like much fun.
It's actually ironic you mentioned that, because that's kind of the way that I took it. Because initially we had looked at lists to try to counter that Stonehorn list and bring our own kind of nastiness as well. So I'll just touch real quickly on my own list. So here's mine. And when I talk about the Death faction, I'm always leaving out the Tomb Kings and the Flesh Eater, of course, because I'm kind of talking about everything that's not under one of those 2 umbrellas. So Paul and I talked not too long ago about an alternate way to play Death. Because Magic was nerfed so heavily, we kind of started looking at what's armies that we can build that can still take advantage of Magic, because people will probably be bringing less to oppose it since it has overall been weakened. But on that whole topic, Tyler, of basically swarming around objectives, I had thought, yeah, the Stonehorns won't be able to kill everything to claim the objectives because I'm bringing 70 zombies as my 3 battle lines, which I could potentially merge into 1 mega unit, and stick Heinrich Kimmler right there in the middle because of his abilities to, basically every time he kills something, add another one to a squad. The zombies can regen as well with their totems. Yeah. They're going to be within range of a hero at all times and get that 6-up ward save because of him. He can sit there and cast his healing ability on stuff if he needs to. He can Arcane Bolt or Mystic Shield out of the middle of them as well. I'm bringing Arcan the Black as my commander for this list because he gives me a plus 6 inches to all of my casters' magic spells, so we can outrange other armies' ability to even dispel our magic.
Yeah.
And then, so we're looking at, for example, with Arcan the Black's unique ability, he rolls 10 dice. On 6s, he inflicts mortal wounds. For every 6 you roll an additional die. On that die roll, it's 5s or greater, and then 4s and so on that inflict these mortal wounds. But now we're looking at that at a 24-inch range. Vlad has normally a 6-inch range spell that can do a similar kind of concept with mortal wounds. And the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon has, again, another similar kind of mortal wound continue to generate based upon prior wounds that's normally at an 18-inch range, but again is now 24 inches. Again, Heinrich Himmler has the ability to cast 2 spells. He can heal my other big bads. We're also tossing in a Corpse card and a Mortis Engine that we'll keep near them, so we're getting a +2 to all of our casts.
Wow.
For all of our wizards. So we got a +6-inch range and a +2 to all of our casting. So if you do even get close enough to Unbind, it's going to be pretty hard. Arcan also is automatically rocking out a +2 of his own just because of his ability, so he's at a +4 for his spells. We've got a Blood Knight squad in there because I love them. They're really tough to take down, and their offensive damage output is ridiculous.
Now, is that a good? Do you think that's a good price for them?
I think that they're worth it. I've never had a squad of Blood Knights completely die on the table, and in most of the games they kill typically about 150% of their own points cost.
Yeah.
Because they heal a wound every time that they kill something in the combat phase, and because of their banner, they can restore an entire model during your hero phase, and it's a 3-wound model with a good save. So I had really, built this list with the thought of how can I kind of counter that Stonehorn list, because so many of the scenarios, like you said, the objective points are scored by who has the most models kind of sitting on an objective within range or whatever. And so I thought, wow, what can really do that better than 70 regenerating zombies with other things to heal them? The Mortis engine can obviously heal my heroes as well, so and all the heroes can heal themselves based upon what they're killing. Vlad is a bargain at 120. So really my thought was just kind of sustain the heroes via different methods, and then have as close to immovable object, I believe, as you can get in Age of Sigmar, with mass hordes of zombies sitting on objectives, if that's what is required, or tar pitting, hopefully, for the entire length of the game, the Stonehorns. Just too many bodies to kill.
Now, do you have ways that you could buff those zombies, get their 2-hit or 2-wound roll up?
Yep. Actually, if they're in a squad of at least 30, they're rocking 3s/3s, and then if they're within range of the corpse cart, the other benefit, they go to 2s/3s.
Well, there you go.
Yep.
Pretty cool, yeah. I like the list.
Thanks.
I don't know a whole lot about Death, but it looks, based on what you described, I could see it being effective at holding up. I need to look a little more closely at the math on the damage output of some of these Deathstar units, or combo, or list in general, Beast Claw, Bone Splitters, and so on. But yeah, it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, the big thing is too that Death, aside from the two kind of sub factions that have really been fleshed out, lacks much range, and so with this particular army, it's all via spells, but you're getting a good amount of mortal wound damage from a pretty good range, most of it being 24 inches, and then the ability to kind of keep generating mortal wounds based upon what you've already scored. Mathematically, you're normally not going to generate a ton each turn, but there's always the chance that you have that really good turn, and even on average, it is something that's going to wear down an opponent, and if you really concentrate all those spells on one Stonehorn or one big, opposing piece that your model's brought each turn, you can realistically either kill it or reduce its effectiveness significantly before it can even get within melee range.
Hmm.
Yeah, I definitely like that list a lot. And I think that's going to be an interesting direction that I think we're going to see too, is I think we're going to see, so far Magic really hasn't been playing that big of a role in Age of Sigmar, but what I'm sort of noticing developing is that there's certain armies that can do it really well and buff it a lot.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to end up seeing Magic being either something you don't take at all, it's a couple of like cantrip kind of spells, or you have like a really Magic heavy list where, like what you were doing, where you have some really big windmill slams that are going to be coming at your opponent, between what Death can do, what Seraphon can do, what Collegiate Arcane can do. And I'm sure there's going to be something in Chaos that I'm not thinking of, and probably something in Destruction I'm not thinking of. But I don't know. I want to play around with Magic a lot because it seems like it typically is either going to deal a lot of mortal wounds, or it's going to have a really big impact on the board if you're using powerful Magic. And right now, not a lot of people are really running anything to stop it.
Yeah. I mean, being familiar with the Sylvaneth list as one example, so they're null root Wargrove. you can, the way that I asked GW about this, at least on the Facebook page, the rules guys haven't come out with an official pack on it yet, but the way that they said that they played with the Gnarl Root Wargrove battalion is that each Tree Lord, Ancient, Branch Witch, and Branch Wraith in your army can cast up to 2 spells per your hero phase. So let's say you're running a 2,000 point list with that battalion. You've got a Lariel, a Tree Lord Ancient, and 2 Branch Witches. You're looking at 9 spells that you can cast per your hero phase. And I think, yeah, I mean, you could do some very interesting things in terms of maybe you're running 2 Tree Lord Ancients. I know you can only cast Awakening the Wood once, but I guess that would limit that. I was going to say more ways of doing more mortal wounds. One of the challenges with the Sylvaneth list, though, is that there's not a tremendous amount of mortal wound output with their Deepwood spell lore, so it's not necessarily as beneficial to be able to cast a lot of spells. But in general, you know, it would be interesting to play test that out. What would it look like to be able to do 9 spells or so, 9 to 11 spells per hero phase?
Yep. Yeah, the list that I've built, for example, casts I think 6 per turn, so not crazy, but still far more than most armies can do.
Right.
Yeah, and you're probably going to be casting it in a way that nobody can unbind it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So
I know we wanted to maybe touch on that kind of broader subject. You guys, you know, in terms of, so we talked about some filth, and if we wanted to get into a little bit about, you know, what kind of culture, what kind of values and tension do we hope to see going forward with the community? You know, I know a lot of folks, they believe, and I think rightly, that if you have the Warhammer culture, let's say 70% of it is focused on filth and competitive list and, you know, smash face, as they say, and only 30% on like open play and narrative and just kind of casual fun and all those things. That's probably not a good thing for the health of the game, the health of the community, the health of Games Workshop. But what is that? You know, what is that balance? Is there room for everyone? So to be more specific, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about what would you like to see the AOS culture look like in 1 year's time? So we're talking again next August. What does the cultural and the values landscape look like for the community as a whole? Maybe Paul, if you have any thoughts.
What I would really like to see is the metagame to develop out in such a way that a broad array of different strategies work, and a solid, well-balanced list also works. And when you have an environment where you have a lot of different strategies that work, it's really inviting to players overall, I think, because you don't feel like you're being stomped by the same thing over and over and over again, right? Like if each faction has a list that can be competitive, or even doesn't even need to try that hard to be competitive, if those skewed lists get pushed out simply by virtue of having strong counters out there for them, I think it pushes the game from a competitive aspect towards the middle, and for the culture of the game, it also does a positive thing where people can still be competitive, they can still try hard, but ultimately, if the game is balanced in the right way, and we get new releases that balance the game in such a way that, you know, you can have a fluffy list that is also effective on the battlefield. You can have, you can have a big variety of scenarios, and you use the points in the General's Handbook just as like your balancing mechanism to figure out what size of a game you're going to play. All of those sorts of things, I think, are really going to drive where I'd like to see the game go. And because they released the game in such a way that it was like open play came first and narrative kind of went along with that, and oh, by the way, now here's a point system, I think it's going to kind of keep the core of the game in that more narrative open mindset, where that's where people are going to gravitate towards. Where just because we have a point system doesn't necessarily mean that that those skewed over the top lists are going to be the thing everybody plays. So what I really ultimately hope to see out of Games Workshop is them releasing things in such a way that we find that the blip that we have right now of skewed lists and, lists like the, with the Stone Horns or with running 3 Hurricanums or, any number of other things, running 3 Maw Crushers maybe. That's like a skewed list and nobody's going to be able to play that because it's just not going to work. Right. Because there's just other stuff out there that counters it. Or that we find over time that people that build lists towards those 6 scenarios are the ones that are going to be winning, not the guys running these crazy skewed lists.
Yeah. Well, if that's going to happen, then I think, number one, you have to get an entire new rules team that GW's never employed before, because if the past shows anything, it's that that's not what they're good at designing. What they're good at designing is armies that tend to cycle as the dominant, overpowered, whatever you want to call it. This is the new hotness, right? Like, I use 40K as the example because with the most current edition, you had the Necrons come out and boom, they're the nearly unbeatable thing. People, basically, if you show up to a tournament with Necrons, everyone's like glaring at you. They're like, oh, you're that guy. And then it was the Eldar, then it was the Tau. And, I really don't want to see that happen here, but that's kind of the pattern GW's shown in the past, so I'm afraid that'll happen, but I hope that what you say does come to pass. What I'd like to see is that we have that, and I'd like to see really that all 3 play systems would continue and be widespread enough to where you can go just about anywhere and say, I'm looking for an narrative play game, and they'll say, oh yeah, this shop runs that on these days, or whatever. Because since the General's Handbook's come out, I've literally seen nothing but match play played, and it's my fear with all this new influx of players who played Classic Warhammer and the new players who come in the future, with that being the dominant system, at least locally, that's played, that's going to kind of push everything away. Because we can say, well, yes, Age of Sigmar started with the open play system, and that's fine for those of us who experience that. But if you come into a game system and you don't experience the open play system because it's not what's played primarily, then maybe all you ever know is the match play system, and that's what you associate as, this is what Age of Sigmar is. And it's my fear that one of these 3, the match play system, can push the other 2 out to absolute skirt fringe-dom that is hardly ever played except for in someone's basement, right? So it's my hope that we can have good tournament organizers who organize events, even if they want to use the points as a guide for how you build your army, that doesn't just play the match play system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like Steve Herner with Holy Wars, and hopefully a lot of others we'll continue to see, and we'll see more of that site grow as we go forward. Yeah. In terms of the points value, so that's, now that we points again, that's obviously a hot topic. It's going to continue to be a hot topic about this is overcosted, this is undercosted, all of that started up again. And, in some ways it started up again with the community comps. When Clash was released, it started, and SCGT and so on. Now, I'm personally in the camp that Clash, SCGT, and so on were good things. I was really glad to see that. It helped get more people back into the game. It helped to inform the General's Handbook points values. There's concern that from many people going forward that we're not going to see any community comps, any of those efforts, maybe at least for some time, because now we have GW getting back involved with it. What do you think about if we were to have, just to throw an idea out there to get you guys feedback, if we were to have a website like scrollbuilder.com, so SCGT was a few people, Russ and Dan Heelan and others, about a half dozen people maybe, who got together to put together SCGT, and it was a huge amount of work. What if you had maybe it was a few dozen community leaders who were involved in heading this up, and then they would selectively invite thoughtful players with experience for different factions to a website in an effort that would focus on one faction at a time, and you'd want to make sure that there's enough time that's elapsed and you're not overreacting, you've had enough play testing that can take place, and a player base build up for that faction. Inviting them to a website I mean, it could be done different ways. One way would be to, okay, here are all of the units, and here is the current points value for those units. And through the user interface of this website, we're curating invites to players to give feedback on what they think the points values should be. And then you take the aggregate of those results as that official, sort of AOS community effort to update the points values on a quarterly or 4-month or 6-month basis as a way of having a community effort that's ongoing that could hopefully then help inform the future points values and maybe accelerate GW's points values iteration than we've seen in the past, where it's taken a while for them to come up with updated points, if they ever update the points. I don't know, do you guys think that something like that would be valuable?
I do. I'd love to see something like that. My, I guess, biggest thing that I always aim for in games is I would love for the game to have, it's more important for me for a game to have internal faction balance than external balance between the factions. Mm-hmm. I'd much rather see someone who plays a Stormcast army bring varied lists than this is the list you bring if you play Stormcast. This is the list you bring if you play Beastclaw Raiders. If you play Stonehorns, because that's what you play. You play Stonehorns. The rest of it doesn't really come into play, right? It's the variance within a same faction that keeps the game interesting to me, and so I think that something like that would definitely be beneficial, and also help kind of counter the Death Star lists that you can see out there, at least currently, kind of at the top of the meta.
What do you think, Paul?
I think the big strength of Age of Sigmar that they've really been pushing is the modularity of the rules.
Yeah.
That you can bolt things on and take things off, and the game still works. And you can change how the game works considerably by just tweaking one of those different modules, right?
Can I interrupt you real quick with a question?
Yes.
I agree. That's a wonderful strength of the system. I want to ask you, how often have you actually seen that? Because, at least for myself, in actual store-run events, not me and my friends just getting together, I've yet to see any of that. And I've actually addressed that with one of the store tournament hosts, and we basically approached the crowd with it, and they're like, well, no, that's not how the rules are. And so I know so many of them, again, played 8th edition and other games, and they have so much of this mindset of, this is what the rule set says, this is what we're going to play, we don't want this, who are you to have the authority to change this, right? And so I just wanted to ask, have you actually seen it? I know it's a beautiful thing, but has it actually been implemented?
In one of the first games after the General's Handbook came out, actually I think it was my second game with the General's Handbook, the first game that I played with it actually after the handbook was released, was actually with major augments to the rules, bolting on different things. We played a big game of Triumph and Treachery and bolted on the match play point system to it.
Right, but that's you and some friends getting together, correct?
Right.
I'm asking about an event or a store hosting something having more than just a group of buddies or even some random people coming together for a single pickup game. I'm talking about more of a governing body in some sort of way saying, for this event we're going to bolt and strap on.
Just for reference, my local FLGS, it's looking like they're going to do a narrative campaign. So they're starting off with a 1,000-point tournament match play just to get people, playing the game again and rebuilding the local community. But yeah, it's looking like that's going to happen. I'm not sure when, but
that's awesome. That's the first I've actually heard of anything that's going outside of the just standard match play.
Yeah.
Yep. And my local GW is going to be running their own narrative campaign to follow up the Season of War as well.
Well, that's awesome. I need to get my local store owners all a kick in the butt and be like, hey, do you like these guys?
Yeah, and I think really simple things can be done for events in that mindset of the rule set is modular, right? Like, you can have a tournament and say, we're going to use all of the rules for match play, except here is a different set of 6 scenarios that we're going to be playing. You know, or you can easily go in and say, okay, we're going to fix some of these skew lists by saying, you know, any behemoth or artillery is treated as unique for this event. You know, that would instantly take out a number of these lists. They just wouldn't be legal at all to play anymore. And it would force people into a more balanced list because they're only allowed to take one off of all of these really big, powerful things.
Yeah, one thing that's unclear to me is how important is this that we're actually... How important is this in the macro in terms of the skewed... in terms of powerful list? Like, so the competitive scene seems to be a very... outspoken and vibrant, evident community, but a very small community relative to the player base as a whole. I could be wrong, but that's just my general impression. You know, you've got a ton of kids out there that are not on Twitter and Facebook. They're like the AOS fans group on Facebook probably doesn't have that many kids. It's probably not a lot of 10 or 12-year-olds are on that. It's probably people our age for the most part. So do these powerful lists actually negatively impact the willingness of young kids or most people to play the game, so that it actually is important that you have a serious effort to try to continue to iterate and maintain a sense of balance, not just for competitive landscape, but for everyone as a whole?
I would say from my own experience, it's that those two groups are very much segregated from each other. And like what I had always seen playing Magic was, you know, you go to, you know, your local Friday Night Magic and you have, you know, the top Pro Tour lists are going to be what everybody is playing. And that's going to be like what's at the top tables. But then you go over to the kids playing casually that are just hanging out, or, you know, somebody that just plays Magic casually that doesn't go to any events at all, and they don't even know what you're talking about when you're talking about like what these top lists are. Right. So like they look at you like two heads when you start like throwing around deck names, and they're like, what is this? Like, somebody's going to be like, think about it in terms of this. Somebody that is a casual player that has 1 or 2 armies that doesn't spend a lot of money on the game, do they even own 4 Stonehorns? Right. Would they ever conceive of owning 4 Stonehorns? Like, it's just not something that's even going to cross people's minds. And even for, it's going to take really hardcore tournament players to actually own that themselves, or hardcore collectors to own that themselves. So I think the two, like, is it going to influence tournament play? Yeah, it's going to screw with tournament play. Is tournament play going to influence rule writing in the future and new points cost updates in the future? Yes, because those are the people that play the most games, so they're distilling down that, like, what is the best thing to do? Where are the holes in the rules? Where are the loopholes? They're finding it because they're playing more than everybody else is, and they care more about the nitty-gritty stuff than everybody else is. And that's why, ultimately, like, the rules guys pay more attention to them. The casual players, like, it's just going to go over their heads. They're not even going to know it's there. Like, for the thousands and thousands of people that play Age of Sigmar, how many of them are even ever going to listen to this show? Right. A few hundred, you know? Like,
all of them.
How many of them even know that you know, these lists are out there? How many? I honestly haven't even seen these lists myself in print. Like, before we had this conversation, it wasn't even really a thought that had crossed my mind that, you know, these GTs that are going on with General's Handbook now are publishing their lists from the event online somewhere. Like, I now, I mean, it's like, duh, obviously, like every tournament that does this stuff that has registered lists of any game system is going to end up posting, like, here's, like, the top 5, you
Right.
know?
Right.
But it just wasn't even a thought that had crossed my mind, and I'm a competitive-minded guy.
My fear is, and again, this is from local anecdotal evidence, is I didn't play Classic Warhammer because of the local community. And the local community that plays Classic Warhammer still is quite small and has been for a long time. So a lot of places had actually stopped carrying Warhammer Fantasy-based products, and it was because the game, at least locally, got choked out by the hyper-competitive players. I've said this before, I'll say it again. It was the most negative group of people I'd ever been around. And it was so much of that extreme, cutthroat, you play the best list or else you just get wiped off the table turn 1 every single game, and they know no other playstyle than that. And that's always my fear, is because that's not an inviting environment. That's not something that encourages new players to get involved. So it's my hope that, obviously, locally and globally, that doesn't happen, and I think that the best way to actually do that is to avoid having the match play system be the only one that's really respectively played in any given location.
Yeah, I remember talking with Vince about this a long while ago, and it almost seemed odd to point it out, but GW hasn't been very explicit about the importance of the social contract. And sometimes I think that we don't talk enough about the social contract, the golden rule equivalent for playing someone in a miniature war game. Outside of a tournament setting, and I do think there is that qualifier with tournaments, you have to have that, but outside of a tournament, the golden rule always applies, period. And I don't think there's enough consistent appreciation of that reality that it might behoove us to be more explicit about it, kind of formal and informal ways. I'm not sure what that would look like to be more explicit about it, but just to really, really, really emphasize it. So I know the scene that's growing, thankfully, in my area, Springfield, Missouri, we have a number of competitive players. I'm a competitive player. I'm doing it from the standpoint of I want to develop an understanding of how to run a list that can do well at tournaments, well enough that I can compete. I'm never going to win a tournament, I know that. But at the same time, I'm not there to play games at my FLGS to win. I'm there to make sure the other player has an amazing time. And that probably means taking lists that are very, very challenging and I'm probably not going to do as well because I want to make sure they're having a good time. So anyway, I just don't know if we're explicit enough about that stuff.
Yeah.
I think in my own experience with Age of Sigmar, like, the bad games are the ones where that is not explicit. And the games where it really is explicit, where you're like, oh, this is kind of like where I'm at, like, this is how hard of a list I'm bringing, yada, yada, yada. I mean, like, that really drives home the fun games. Like, when everybody's on the same page about what you're doing, even if it is hyper competitive, as long as you and your opponent are both being like top tier level competitive with your list and the game you're bringing to the table, you're both going to have a good time because that's what you're both there for.
Right. Absolutely.
It really is absolutely about that social contract thing, like actually having that conversation with your opponent before the game, not just bringing a list and saying, here's what I brought, deal with it,
Right.
Yep, completely agree. Well, I hate to cut this off because this is a great discussion, but I have to get up quite early. So we're going to wrap up that topic. And Paul, if you want to real quickly touch on your misplay of the day for all of our viewers before we sign off.
All right. So once again, my misplay of the day is actually against the same opponent as my last one was. I think actually against the same list with ogres. And the big misplay for me here was, keep your eyes on the prize, and make sure that you are appropriately addressing the objectives in the scenario that you're playing. And when you notice that your opponent isn't properly addressing those, that you're really taking advantage of it. I noticed in this particular game far too late. I believe we were playing Take and Hold. Is that the one with like the two objectives and you control one in your deployment zone and your opponent has one in their deployment zone?
Yeah.
And you need, I think, at least 5 models to hold the objective.
Right.
And I realized, like, somewhere like turn 3 or 4 that my opponent had been holding his objective the whole game in his deployment zone, but he had been doing it with 1 model.
Yeah.
And I had completely refocused the way that I was attacking the objectives. And the same thing really on my side of the board. He was assaulting the objective in my deployment zone with just his Stonehorn and really kind of going on a killing rampage with everything else. If I had really focused on holding the objective with a number of models and attacking the other objective with a number of models, and really playing directly to the scenario, I think that I would have ended up in a much better position. Either way, I ended up getting tabled, so it didn't really matter either way. He was going to get at least a minor victory. But keep your eyes on the prize is definitely the moral of the story for me.
And you said that this is the second time you lost that list?
Yes.
Okay, I think you misapplied Yoda's wisdom in saying you must unlearn what you have learned. It doesn't mean forget everything you learned when fighting this army the first time.
Yes. I was also experimenting with the list that I brought, too. So I was just trying out some things that I hadn't tried before.
I use that excuse, too. That's
That's what I was going to say.
It is a really good excuse.
It is.
Oh, I was just experimenting.
Exactly.
So either you guys have a misplay care to share?
I had a similar one. So, yeah, Blood and Glory, you have to control 4 objectives, and I misunderstood the victory conditions, which is I thought it was at the end of turn 3 if you control, I believe, 3 of the objectives. Yeah, no, if you control all of them at the end of turn 3, you win automatically. I thought it was at the end of turn 3, but it's actually at the beginning of turn 3. And so at the bottom of turn 2, my opponent dropped in 2 units of 5 teleporting retributors, 5 each, and there wasn't a damn thing that I could do about it. I didn't have enough models within range of either objective. I'd moved my guys too far away like an idiot and promptly lost that one. So, yeah. Understand the victory conditions and pay attention to where you have your models.
Yes.
Yep. I unfortunately was not able to get a game in since last time. Tried, but failed to get one in. So I do not have a misplay for today. And then there's also the fact that I don't make misplays.
Oh,
so
of course. Yeah.
I learned.
All right, so I believe that is going to put another one in the can for us this week. So thanks again for coming and visiting with us, Tyler, and we will be back again next week with another fun and exciting look at the tactics of Age of Sigmar. You have anything else for us, James?
I don't. You closed it well.
All right. So everybody, we will see you all next week.
Happy gaming.